Hey guys, this is Stand Up, episode 229. Joining me today, foreign relations expert Aaron David Miller, economics, finance, politics with the great Barry Ritholtz. I am Pete Dominic. Time to stand up with me right now. Hello, my friends, and welcome to episode 229. We are in the middle of November as I tape this, the 11th to be exact. It was Veterans Day today, and you are listening to this probably on the 12th. The show comes out every day by 4 a.m. Thank you very much for joining me at the top of the show every day. Do about 10 or 15 minutes recapping the day before news, give you a couple thoughts, ideas, and updates, and then we head into the conversations, two of which I have for you today. Always happy when I get an opportunity to talk to either of these two guys, Aaron David Miller and Barry Ritholtz. Okay, quickly want to let you know that tonight at 8:30 Eastern, I had to move it to 8:30 Eastern. Tonight, that is the 12th of November, Zoom Hangout. You can get the link by becoming a subscriber. Sign up now if you aren't already. If you can't see the link and you are a subscriber, go to patreon.com. Go to your account there. You should see it. If you still can't see it, email me, standupwithpete@gmail.com, and I'll literally send it to you. Okay, and also the Discord platform is up, and what am I supposed to say about that? Some of the community members, John, Vicky, and Therese, wrote me a little language. Okay, here it is. If you haven't already, join the stand-up community as a paid subscriber. Paid members get access to special Zoom hangouts like the one tonight at 8:30, because I'm going to be on with Ted Alexandro on his live show on YouTube, by the way. That's why I'm going to be late. Anyway, if you become a paid subscriber, you'll also be supporting me as I create the show and be a part of the community. Win-win. Discord gives stand-up members an invite-only place to talk in topic-based channels and a platform for small group audio and video chats any time of the day. So, like I say, at the end of every show, you are never alone. Be a part of the community and join the Discord chat. Okay, yesterday was a day because, of course, the COVID numbers continue to spike. That's right, the pandemic is getting really bad again. Former FDA Commissioner Scott Gottlieb said last Sunday that his view is the inflection point will be Thanksgiving, when states can start seeing exponential growth. That's when it's going to get even worse around Thanksgiving. Health experts have warned of heightened risk for increased cases and deaths as the U.S. heads into winter months and the pandemic intersects with the seasonal flu. The spread of the virus showing no signs of slowing as the U.S. surpassed 10 million reported cases on Monday. The 15 days with the highest number of new cases have all taken place over the past 18 days. The U.S. confirmed a record high 130,989 new coronavirus infections on Tuesday, while the number of people currently hospitalized with the virus hit a peak of 61,964, according to the COVID Tracking Project. That is how many people currently in the hospital. Wow. Yeesh. It's very bad and very stressful. And if that wasn't enough, President Trump continues to deny that he lost the presidential election, which is now just over a week old, but which was confirmed by many news networks this past Saturday, including the Associated Press, which is why it was weird today to see Ivanka Trump tweet when the Alaska results came in on Wednesday that Ivanka Trump took to Twitter to celebrate that state and its 3 electoral college votes. She wrote, President Trump and the Senate Republican wins Alaska overwhelmingly and by a massive 20-point spread. Put Alaska in the books for real Donald Trump. And she quoted the Associated Press calling Alaska for Trump. Well, Associated Press reporter Will Staken says, at AP also called the entire election for Joe Biden. So can the media call a state or not? When does it count? Only when he wins? I mean, it's really crazy. But who amongst the Trump supporters, prominent Trump supporters, folks on the right, is starting to be a little bit more honest? Who amongst the world is starting to realize the truth? First, I think it's worth mentioning that pro-Trump pastor Robert Jeffress, who's just a monster and a maniac, he's thrown in the towel acknowledging Biden is in fact presidential-elect. Pastor Robert Jeffress has come out and publicly revealed that he believes former Vice President Joe Biden defeated the re-election bid of President Donald Trump. This guy is this Dallas evangelical pastor and might be one of the most conservative or vocal conservative supporters in the evangelical base. So Trump really relied on him and makes it a really noteworthy statement. Also, Karl Rove, of course, the architect of former President George W. Bush's gubernatorial and presidential campaigns, this scoundrel, another dirtbag, but yet still acknowledging Wednesday that the 2020 presidential election will not be overturned regardless of the flurry of lawsuits. I think he's over 12 that President Trump has challenged. Karl Rove advised the White House and Trump campaign leading up to the election, and he wrote in a Wall Street Journal op-ed that while the president is within his right to challenge the results, his efforts are, quote, unlikely to move a single state from Mr. Biden's column, and certainly they're not enough to change the final outcome. So he's lost Robert Jeffress. He's lost Karl Rove, who went on to say to prevail, Trump would need to prove systemic fraud with illegal votes in tens of thousands. There's no evidence of that so far. Unless some emerges quickly, the president's chances in court will decline precipitously when states start certifying results. So he's lost Karl Rove and he's lost Robert Jeffress, but he hasn't lost this nut job Wayne Allen Root, who is another conservative author, radio host, used to be on Newsmax. He's an opinion columnist. He is an absolute crazy pants lunatic as well, who's on the record for some very extreme radical views. Obviously a conspiracy theorist for any number of reasons. A guy who likely believes the moon is made of cheese. Wayne Allen Root was also one of the leading proponents of the birther theory that Barack Obama wasn't born in America. Anyway, this is what he tweeted, and this is what I think a lot of people are going to argue. Poorly and without any evidence whatsoever, they're still going to say it. Rudy Giuliani has confirmed whistleblowers from Dominion have come forward. OMG, they stole election, switched votes from at-real Donald Trump. What did he really get? 81 million votes? 91 million votes? But they stole it. Biggest scandal in world history. We got him. So that is what we are going to hear. I think we'll hear this the most. This is the easiest one for people to just say without any evidence, because they don't have evidence for many of their arguments and claims, that the votes were just switched. They were just switched. It wasn't that people voted fraudulently. It wasn't that you got dead people voting that somehow affected the outcome of the election, because none of those things would really change enough votes. You couldn't get enough people to actively do things like that. So somebody just went into a computer and simply pressed a couple of keys, and that's it. They switched the election. It's really easy to do, apparently, and it's the biggest scandal in world history. I think I read one thing that said 8 out of 10 Republicans believe that Trump won and that Biden stole it. I also read today that 80% of Americans believe that Biden won the election. We'll see more of these types of survey and polling questions, but polling reputation has taken a big hit. So what is it really? Nearly 80% of Americans accept Joe Biden won presidential election, with just 3% saying Trump was reelected, according to the Reuters Ipsos poll. So meanwhile, back in reality, here is Senator Chris Murphy, who I love, on the Senate floor yesterday.
There is an epidemic of delusion that is spreading out from the White House and infecting the entire Republican Party in the wake of this election. And it presents a real threat to this country. President Trump didn't win the election. Every single one of my colleagues knows this.
Senator Chris Murphy of Kentucky, that whole floor speech is worth watching. Also, getting a lot of attention during this election is the lieutenant governor of Pennsylvania, because he's like this big, kind of rugged looking guy, like very big and very tough looking, yet a liberal Democrat. He's the lieutenant governor there in Pennsylvania. His name is, I think, John Fetterman. Yeah, he was on CNN with John King, and this is what he had to say.
I mean, look, bottom line, if ifs and buts were candy and nuts, the president would be on deck to have a better Thanksgiving than he's going to have. You know, math doesn't care about his feelings, doesn't care about anyone's feelings. The math in Pennsylvania is damning for the president. Like, these contested late ballots, 10,000, like, oh, no, we're going to take that to the Supreme Court. Like, take it to the Supreme Court. You know what? Spot the president, all 10,000, for all I care. Because the vice president is going to be up 50, 60,000 votes when all the counting is done, if not more. The bottom line is that there is no truth to any of this. And at some point, we all have to collectively accept that yelling voter fraud when there is no evidence whatsoever of it is yelling fire in a crowded theater, and it is harming the democratic franchise of our country and the peaceful transition to power. And we cannot accept that.
John Fetterman, Lieutenant Governor of Pennsylvania. He's a pretty smart dude. Also, election officials in 45 states, you guys, representing both political parties, said there was no evidence of voter fraud or irregularity. State officials and secretaries of state in 4 of the 5 remaining states reported no major voting issues. Officials in Texas did not respond when asked whether they suspected or had evidence of illegal voting, according to the New York Times. Also, a Pennsylvania postal worker admitted that he fabricated the allegations that a postmaster instructed postal workers to backdate ballots mailed after Election Day. Look it up. His name is Richard Hopkins. Georgia will conduct a statewide hand recount of ballots cast in the election because of baseless accusations of election fraud from Republicans there and the fact that it was a very close vote. The Trump campaign filed another lawsuit in Michigan challenging election results over alleged irregularities. Nothing probably going to happen with that one like the rest of these lawsuits. The Office of the Director of National Intelligence is not providing Joe Biden with intelligence reports until the General Services Administration recognized that Biden won the election. This is very dangerous. Here is the former head of the CIA, John Brennan, on CNN.
But again, this is something that, as you pointed out, it can be very damaging to our national security because this period of transition from one administration to the other is critically important for our country. But also it's when other countries are looking very closely at what we are doing here.
One of those countries looking very closely, as they all are, to what we're doing here is, of course, the United Kingdom, which is led by Boris Johnson, who's had I think it's fair to say, cozy relationship with Donald Trump. He is not a very popular guy and somehow won the election there because they've got some similar problems that we do. But anyway, they have certainly a different system, and he was there in Parliament, part of that different system, standing on the floor there, and he made these comments about how excited he is to work with Joe Biden on these initiatives. And then, of course, he's interrupted by another PM who asks him, well, wait, hold on a second. What about your relationship with Donald Trump, who's just completely denying that the election happened? Are you gonna talk to him about that, Bojo? And he responds, and I think this whole clip is worth sharing. Listen to this from across the pond.
One of the many merits of the excellent conversation I had yesterday with President-elect Joe Biden was that we were strongly agreed on the need for the United Kingdom and the United States to stand together, to stick up for our values around the world, to stick up for human rights, to stick up for global free trade, to stick up for NATO, Mr. Speaker, and to work together in the fight against climate change, Mr. Speaker. And it was refreshing, I may say, to have that conversation. I look forward to many more.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister spoke for many of us when he took a call yesterday to congratulate President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Harris on their emphatic win in the US presidential election. So does the Prime Minister now have any advice for his erstwhile best friend, President Trump, whose continuing refusal to accept the result is both embarrassing for him and dangerous for American democracy?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I had and have a good relationship with the previous president. I do not resile from that. This is the duty of all British Prime Ministers to have a good relationship with the White House. But I'm delighted to find the many areas in which the incoming Biden-Harris administration is able to make common cause with us. In particular, it was extremely exciting to talk to President-elect Biden about what he wants to do with the COP26 summit next year, Mr. Speaker, in which, as you know, the UK is leading the world in driving down carbon emissions and tackling climate change.
Oh, so much different than the system that we have here. But I do like that Boris Johnson is talking about that issue and working with Joe Biden on that issue. But nonetheless, we have a real problem here in America in the fact that over 80%, more than 8 in 10 Trump voters think Biden's win is not legitimate. Probably a number of reasons, Washington Post Phil Bump writes, that President Trump is so insistent that he won the presidential election, which he lost. One is psychological. He is insistent that he's a winner and losing is not something winners do. Another is financial. By claiming that there's still a fight, he can continue to wring contributions out of his base. Part of it is obviously about the power. His autocratic tendencies have never been more pronounced than in this effort to reject the result of a democratic election. That being president shields him from criminal inquiry is probably itself a strong enough motivation. Problem is that Trump's intransigence is not occurring in a vacuum. As the leader of the Republican Party, Phil Bump writes, the head of a personality-based movement numbering in tens of millions, Trump's rejection of election results means that millions of Americans do as well. Poses a risk both to the American democratic system over the short term, that is, until next year's inauguration, but more broadly to confidence in the process moving forward. Phil Bump, great writer and reporter at the Washington Post, 86% of Trump voters don't think Biden legitimately won the election. My question for you, the listener, the subscriber, the stand-up community member is, how does this conversation change, if at all, as we move on? I really like the idea of reaching out to Trump supporters and having conversations to try to understand where they're coming from. Many of you don't necessarily even want to hear that anymore. Many of you have reached out to me and suggested that I do actually do that. And the truth is, every day I put together a podcast that usually has 2 guests, sometimes more. But what I'm going to try to do is have these conversations with people. And if you don't want to listen to them, you don't have to. Yesterday, that was the case. Even though Paul Rieckhoff was an excellent guest on Veterans Day, more than 2 or 3 people reached out to me and said, you know what, I just couldn't listen to that interview as much as I love Paul Rieckhoff, as much as I care about veterans and veterans issues. It was too dour, too negative, too scary for me. So you can listen to the other conversation that I had with Wajahat Ali, which a lot of people loved on yesterday's podcast. So trying to give you a variety, trying to give you a few things to choose from on every day's podcast and hoping that you will support me. As a matter of fact, Jim from Michigan, longtime listener and supporter, reached out to me yesterday. I jumped on the phone with Jim and he said, hey, Pete, how about an idea of gifting a subscription to a friend or family member, gifting it to them? And I said, yeah, I'm not sure how that'll work, Jim, but absolutely. That's a great idea. The holidays are coming. You want to get a gift for somebody, get them the gift of enlightenment and learning together with an amazing community and membership into a community of people who are curious and kind and passionate and funny and thoughtful. And so there you go. Good idea, Jim. I'll try to make a more formal pitch for that. Maybe the Patreon system of subscription, which is the app that I use, has a way of doing that. But sure, gift a subscription to other people. All right, let me get to my first guest today. He had a tweet go absolutely viral yesterday after he criticized Mike Pompeo, the current Secretary of State, because he has worked with so many secretaries of state. And during my interview with him, I actually asked him to read that tweet. He's now a senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. He has written 5 books, including most recently, The End of Greatness, Why America Can't Have and Doesn't Want Another Great President. Between 1978 and 2003, he served at the State Department as a historian, analyst, negotiator, and advisor to both Republican and Democratic secretaries of state. He's a member on the Council on Foreign Relations. He's a global affairs analyst for CNN. His articles have appeared in the New York Times, Washington Post, Politico, Foreign Policy, and so many other places. He is an old friend of mine who I've had many conversations with over the years. He is Aaron David Miller right now. And there he is, ladies and gentlemen, Aaron David Miller. A lot of books behind him. Very, very smart guy. Probably wrote most of them. Thank you for joining me.
Pete, I love talking to you. You know that. In the Pink Shed.
In the Pink Shed. Nailed it. Well done. But I mean, the last book you did write was about leadership, though. So I definitely want to talk with you about that if we have a chance here. But sure. First of all, I just wanted to kind of look back. I'm reaching out to experts all week to look back at the Trump administration and ask you, what did they accomplish? Or maybe the better question is, what did they destroy?
You know, disruption, by definition, is not necessarily a bad thing.
Okay.
Unless you disrupt and make a situation worse, or you disrupt ultimately and don't replace it with anything. So I think that by and large, and another 4 years of this, which we're not going to have, I think you'd see disruption evolve into destruction. So I think that if you asked me to identify a couple. I mean, you can't call them accomplishments because they're very much works in progress, and I'm not entirely sure that the works were headed in the right direction. Number one for me, which is frankly a continuation of the Obama foreign policy, was avoiding deploying large numbers of human beings, Americans, men and women, to problem areas, conflict areas that we simply can't repair.
Right.
And they exercised a pretty fair amount of discipline there in Iraq and Afghanistan, although the threats to withdraw American forces, even in Syria, were so incompetently handled.
Right.
That it undermined our credibility. But
it sounds like you're giving Donald Trump credit for not starting a war or occupying a country with a military.
Yes, and that is accompanied by a fair amount of risk aversion on the part of the president. All right. All of that, I think, for whatever reason it was done, and it was done, the overarching, borrowing a Star Trek metaphor here, of the Trump administration, the prime directive was tethering the national interests or redefining the national interests in terms of Donald Trump's political interests.
Right.
Almost everything he's done, almost without exception, has been interlinked with an effort to cater to some political constituency, or alternatively, even 4 years after he became president, uses his North Star, the un-Obama. That essentially has guided his foreign policy.
Right.
For whatever reason, he didn't engage in reckless military action or nation build abroad. Frankly, I'm not sure it matters. I think that was one of the more redemptive aspects of his policy.
When you look overall at relationships, which is what you did for a living and still do, is help build relationships around the world. When you think about our traditional friends, which weren't really controversial in America, as much as we disagree on most things, we generally say, yeah, the British and the Israelis and the Europeans, the Australians, they're our friends, and then our enemies are these guys. It seems like the alliances, the organizations that we belong to, who we traditionally thought of as friends and allies, he alienated and he cozied up with like 5 of the worst men, strong men in the world. And can that just be undone? Did the whole world have they just been holding their breath, other world leaders?
I think it can. Actually, market improvement in relations with allies is what I call low-hanging fruit for the Biden administration.
Right.
That is going to happen effortlessly. The fact that you're going to have a president who looks like a president, who acts like a president, and who projects the importance of some kind of American leadership in the world, all of that is going to be unbelievably quickly and almost effortlessly welcomed. And that's going to go a long way. You know, Obama got the Nobel Peace Prize essentially for doing nothing other than not being George W. Bush. Europeans were really happy to see him. And then that Nobel basically should have been inscribed, hello, Barack Obama, goodbye, George W. Bush.
Right.
So that should serve as something of an example. We broke a lot of crockery with Iraq, right? A lot. And Obama was able relatively quickly to restore some sense of multilateral diplomacy and international cooperation with the three. Now, there was no Bojo at the time, but with Macron and Merkel,
right,
it worked pretty well. And I expect, since the Brits want something from us, which is a trade agreement that Boris is going to have to tailor some of his fascination with Trump to the king is dead, long live the king. So I think there, in terms of allies, South Korea, I think there'll be a greater confidence there. And a lot of this stuff could be done through executive order or action. He can rejoin Paris Climate, WHO, cancel the Muslim ban, do something with the Dreamers. I mean, you're going to see a lot of that.
What about the Iran deal?
That's important. Well, now you get into what I call fruit that is higher up the tree.
It just gets more difficult.
The low-hanging fruit is easy to grab.
Right.
and probably tastes pretty good. The Iran fruit is, frankly, even if he succeeds, I mean, Obama demonstrated that no good deed goes unpunished. Seriously.
Yeah.
They spent 2 years negotiating this agreement, which was never intended to be a transformation. It was a transaction, right? We don't have a fix for the fact that Iran is a screwdriver's turn away from enough fissile material to manufacture a weapon or two. So the JCPOA, the Iran deal, was an effort to buy time for a problem we couldn't fix. It wasn't perfect. So, Trump walks away, it brings on maximum pressure, and now Iran is 4 months away from developing enough fissile material to make 2 weapons. So I think it's going to be hard because the R's will control the Senate, most likely. Don't want to prejudge that, but I don't know if the Democrats ever won a runoff election in Georgia. Hard because 2021 are Iranian presidential elections. Hard because the supreme leader's view is that the U.S. is a convenient tool of mobilization, distraction, and an effort to convince the elites in Iran. He's not having much success with the general public, who I think would like to find a way out of the box with the Americans. But we're a useful tool of mobilization and regime consolidation. So I don't know how you get around that.
Right.
But it's possible. A little sanctions relief for suspension of some of the activities that the Iranians have been doing on the nuclear side, which is in violation of the agreement. Maybe. I just think the bandwidth for foreign policy here, because of the 4 interlocking crises that Joe Biden is going to face, the greatest challenge of national recovery since FDR, without the Second World War, which left the U.S. stronger at home and with more influence abroad.
Oh, good way of putting it. Well, let me ask you what you think about Donald Trump's 2 secretaries of state, starting with Rex Tillerson, the former ExxonMobil CEO. And apparently it's no secret that Rex Tillerson and Donald Trump never really liked each other, never really got along. Not sure exactly how he got the job. I forget the story about how he got the job, who recommended him, but didn't last very long, didn't get much done. It would seem that Trump would send Rex Tillerson on a long plane ride to another country to carry out some idea. He would go and say that, deliver the message, and then Trump would tweet, I don't even know what Tillerson's talking about. How did that relationship go? What did you think of Tillerson's tenure?
Shortest tenured Secretary of State in the modern history of the Republic, probably chosen because he looked the part, right out of central casting.
Yeah.
That's the way Donald Trump operates, I think, in terms of first impressions. Tillerson never had a chance. I think he was a good and decent man, was interested in somehow reforming the State Department, reconceptualizing it. It wasn't going to work. Trump wasn't interested in delegating serious authority to him anyway. And when, in fact, your Secretary of State says that you're a effing moron, you don't seem to have a longevity in the Trump administration.
Right.
Now, the other guy, Mike Pompeo, frankly, in my judgment, is much worse than Rex Tillerson. Much, much worse. I worked for half a dozen secretaries of state. They all had their strengths. They colored within the lines. They saw the job as nonpartisan. That's why you don't pick aspiring pals or senators or representatives to become Secretary of State. The great ones, frankly, never ran for elected office. The last Secretary of State to accede to the presidency was James Buchanan. That was a long time ago. But Pompeo, since he has his own political aspirations and ambitions, 2024, because he operated in a world in which even if he had his own ideas on what to do about Iran and North Korea, Tillerson was the dead dog on the lawn. He was essentially And Pompeo didn't want to end up like that.
He walked into the White House or the State Department past that dead dog.
Right.
I asked you to read this, to get this tweet, because you wrote this tweet yesterday that went very viral. And I'd asked you before we hit record to get that. Could you just read what you wrote on Twitter about Mike Pompeo yesterday after he said what he said about continuing the Trump administration?
Yeah. Having had the honor to work for 6, I can say without hesitation or reservation, Pompeo was the worst Secretary of State in the history of our republic. A man who hasn't a single enduring diplomatic success and now slavishly follows Trump down the rabbit hole of a faux second administration. The shame of it.
I interrupted there. That was beautiful. It was a beautiful piece. That was a beautiful tweet, sir. There's not many tweets that are beautiful, but that one was elegant, and because it came from you, having had so much experience and being so unequivocal with your criticism. Why do you think, what has Mike Pompeo accomplished or not? Again,
well, I think that's the real question. I mean, if you're a Secretary of State, to be a consequential Secretary of State, you diffuse crises, or you create policies that are set up to solve problems, or to use honey and or vinegar to create incentives and disincentives for countries to do things that you want them to do. And, I cannot identify, I said a single enduring success. North Korea probably has more nukes 4 years later than they had when we started. The Iranians are suffering. I suppose if you argue that maximum pressure designed to fracture or end the regime is the way to go here, and Iran ultimately going to capitulate, or the regime is going to collapse, then maybe Mike Pompeo deserves some credit for that because he owned that policy. I just think that policy, frankly, was a disaster. The Abraham Accords, that was not brought to you courtesy of Mike Pompeo. Jared Kushner made clear to me when I met him several times in 2017 and 2018 that they were much more interested in the 22-state solution than they were the 2-state solution.
Right.
They wanted to get Israel engaged and involved with the Arabs. That was not Pompeo's doing. I mean, he allowed a reckless and ruthless Saudi king, backed by the president, basically to continue a disastrous policy in Yemen, repression at home. So I'm searching for one enduring success, and I don't see it. I mean, you could argue that not ending up like Rex Tillerson was an accomplishment, particularly for a guy who wants to run for president.
But doesn't the world community, even intellectual foreign policy and diplomats, don't they look at other countries and look at the leader that they've democratically elected, in this case the Secretary of State he selected, who paid fealty to him, and say, oh, something's screwy around that country? I mean, how do they look at America, pick anywhere you want, given the fact that Donald Trump has been our president? I mean, don't they have to be deeply concerned, not about the specifics of any accords, any treaty, any negotiation, but that a madman, an absolute lunatic who cares only about himself and his own interests, his personal interests, has been in charge? I mean, what does that do to the reputation of a country? How does the world community, at least the decision makers, the influential people, see us?
It's a very good question. And I would add to that the concern that Joe Biden will himself be an aberration. Right. And within 4 years, we'll return to something akin to the Trump era with an American first, populist, me first approach to the world that will return. And people are very worried about that. I mean, I'm an optimist. I think America has tremendous recuperative and powers of recovery, but our reputation, our street cred, has taken a huge hit. I mean, incompetency, malign and willful destruction of democratic norms. I just think, and it flows from a fundamental division, polarization in this country, which Donald Trump has exacerbated in the extreme. So I think it's possible that we can recover, but I will say this, unless we figure out a way to deal with these four sorts of crises in a more competent way, we're not going to be able to have a foreign policy consensus that has strong domestic support. And we're going to be flip-flopping, and we're going to be traveling down a rabbit hole of unreliability and unpredictability and inconsistency that will make us, we're not going to be respected or admired in the world unless we figure out a way to deal with what ails us at home. There is a last point on this. I know, sorry, I'm droning on.
No, it's fine.
There is not a single foreign policy problem, in my judgment, that is more threatening to the interest, well-being, security, prosperity of this nation than the toxic mix that threatens us here at home.
Right.
And if I could just take a minute and just, I have to read this because it should be the point of departure for the incoming administration and anyone who thinks seriously about foreign policy.
Sure.
Lincoln was 28 years old when he gave a speech in Springfield, Illinois, to the Young Men's Lyceum. And listen to what he says. At what point shall we expect the approach of danger? By what means shall we fortify against it? Shall we expect some transatlantic military giant to step the ocean and crush us at a blow? Never. All the armies of Europe, Asia, and Africa combined, with all the treasure of the earth in their military chest, with a Bonaparte for a commander, could not by force take a drink from the Ohio or make a track on the Blue Ridge in a trial of 1,000 years. At what point, then, is the approach of danger to be expected? Lincoln concludes, I answer, if it ever reach us, it must spring up amongst us. It cannot come from abroad. If destruction be our lot, we must ourselves be its author and finisher. As a nation of free men, we must live through all time or die by suicide. We've met the problem, and the problem is us. And I can't, Lincoln's cautionary note is right. And we got to get a grip on this. George Packer in The Atlantic writes an article that we become two separate nations.
Yeah.
Can't conquer one another, can't
work together, convince each other.
Yeah. I mean, I don't see any other way around it. And you'll have to accept a certain amount of polarization and dissension and a certain amount of wildness in our politics. But we've come to a point where we've got to figure out a way through this, and I really don't know how you do it.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
Yeah, I mean, you can take any one problem and try to look at how America could solve it. I think the most obvious one is the easiest one, frankly, to understand is a virus. And if we can't work together and be on the same team and agree in the same baseline of data and trust the scientists, then we can't do what we need to do to take precautions and to shut certain things down and to work together to beat it. We're divided over a virus. You don't see that really in most other countries. There's division, but not at this level.
Right, because you see a fundamentally different capacity of the societies that did well with this, like South Korea. High trust and confidence in government on the part of the local citizenry.
Yeah. Some
experience with the pandemic, with SARS and MERS.
Right.
And a faith in science. There's an anti-authority, individualist streak in the political culture of this nation, which has existed since we were born.
Yep.
It's why we don't have a rational gun control policy. It's why we continue, unlike every other modern nation, not to be able to come up with a rational healthcare policy. It exists.
Yeah.
And it's built in here. I know it's heretical, but I wonder as a thought experiment, had the virus struck when Barack Obama was president or George W. Bush, how much better would it have been? Would people have followed? You know the expression a leader without followers is just a guy out for a walk. The fact is, I just don't know. I don't know whether the nation or much of the nation would have come around.
I think
otherwise, you tell me how it is possible in the last 8 months, in the course of the greatest threat to public health since the great influenza of 1918, which killed 675,000 Americans, when on paper, the health of every single American was threatened. Every one. Talk about a nation income rate crisis. How is it possible in the midst of this pandemic that Donald Trump managed not only to get the second highest vote total since the turn of the 20th century, but got a greater share of the non-white vote than any other Republican candidate in 60 years. I have
an answer. I read James Hamlin in The Atlantic yesterday, and he did some research on the history of kind of disease and when people are threatened. And one of the takeaways was when we're sick, humans threatened by disease, we seem uniquely susceptible to scams, and this phenomenon transcends ideological bounds. We fuse our identities in some ways, and we've always been humans susceptible to quackery, to doctors selling snake oil, doing whatever you can. And my biggest concern, I was at the RNC, and I asked the Trump supporters at the RNC in 2015, Aaron, how do you support, what do you think about Trump's support of, and I named several conspiracy theories. That was my concern. They aren't concerned about them because he's their leader. He's working with Alex Jones. He's friends. He endorses the craziest ideas in the world and makes them up, and people will follow him, especially when they're scared.
I mean, I guess that's an explanation, but can it really pertain to all of those people?
No, a lot of them are just assholes. Some people are just cruel.
70 million people?
So, a lot of people are just cruel, I think. There's a certain identity. You touched on it about the individualist. The idea, Americans are individuals, and so we don't want to be in, crazy things like insurance pools. It's a weird strain. I'm way over my time with you. I got to let you go. I really appreciate you joining me today. I love talking to you. I love learning from you. I love reading you. Thank you very much, Aaron David Miller, for being available.
Pete, back at you. And we'll do it again.
I look forward to it.
Take care.
Aaron David Miller on Twitter, by the way, at Aaron D. Miller 2, at Aaron D. Miller 2. A great follow and a great read and a great guy. Love talking to him. I think it has TV on in the background. Could you hear that? There's a little background noise in my next interview, too, because my friend Barry Ritholtz is a job creator, and he's having some home improvement done on his lovely home. And I reached out to Barry Ritholtz because I always love talking with him about, anything. I mean, we're pretty much in constant contact. I mean, he basically texts me political stuff and little jokes all day long. We're really, really very good friends and have become closer over the years. He, of course, is the co-founder, chairman, and chief investment officer of Ritholtz Wealth Management. He has got a big media empire kind of to go along with it, as do his partners in the firm. He is the creator and host of Masters in Business, a very popular podcast on Bloomberg Radio. He is also the author of Bailout Nation. You got to check out his blog, The Big Picture, and subscribe to his daily reads, which I get so much great information and ideas from. He's on Twitter at Ritholtz. My conversation with Barry Ritholtz. Yeah, he's wearing the Triumph T-shirt, Barry Ritholtz.
This isn't a Trump shirt? I thought this said Trump.
Well, you just got done telling me a story where somebody mistaked your Triumph shirt for a Trump shirt and attacked you.
Yeah, well, it was in a TSA line in an airport a couple of summers ago. And I when you're doing Zoom call, you see what you're wearing.
Yeah.
But when you're in real life, I don't remember what the fuck I put on 8 hours ago. Who knows? So this woman comes up to me, really like a 25-year-old woman comes up to me online in TSA. You're okay with separating kids from their parents and putting them in cages? No, I'm not. Why do you ask? And then her second question was, and the racism and the sexism and the anti-Semitism? And I'm like, no, who's okay with that?
Were you just looking around to see if there was cameras from the Daily Show?
Right. Like, you're all right with the tax cut going to the top 1%? And I'm like, no, I'm not okay with any of that. And I go, I'm sorry, but I'm not on the same side of those issues on any of them. Why do you ask? And she goes, because of your shirt. And I looked down and I was like, it's not this one. It was a yellow shirt. Triumph, fine motorcycle since 1907. And I had to point out, and she's like, oh, and then she spun on her heels and walked away. And all I can think of was, I don't understand how people are so freaked out about anything that they just lose their ability to think rationally.
That's because of the privilege that you have as a white man. I mean, you're Jewish.
Listen.
You should be able to understand that. The threat to Jewish people is sometimes Jewish people get, I'll be like irrational with their fears. I mean, it used to be more irrational than it has been the past few years since people started shooting up synagogues. But,
Right. My one.
If you're a woman, if you're a minority, you're worried.
I was called a kike as a kid. I never knew what it meant. That happened once. And I'm like, I went home and said, Mom, what's a kike? I never had heard that, dirty word for Jews. But my favorite story was of my white privilege. So I was a visiting student for one semester in Albany. And Albany was a mix of downstate people, but half of it was very rural people.
Yeah, it's where I went. Right near there.
So, not a lot of, they were not very experienced with people of color, with Jews, and I met one of the girls on my hall's brother at a party one night. And it was literally like a bit out of a routine. You one of them Jews? I never met one of y'all before. And I don't know why from upstate New York, you would have a Southern accent, but
that's all you got. That's all you got.
And I got that question, which I had read about, but never experienced personally. I got both versions of it. Where are your horns and why did you kill Jesus? And that was, so I'm 19 or 20? Jeez. It's my only real experience with that. And being the wise ass that I am, both of my answers did not help this person at all.
Yeah.
Probably did not help Jews at all.
And what's not helping Ritholtz Wealth, your firm, I don't think the slogan "one of them Jews" is helping you. I really think you should ditch that. You're going to get it anyway, by the way. If you work in finance, you're going to get that assumption anyway, even if you're like African black guy
in New York, right? So the answer to both questions is, when we get circumcised, the horns get removed, but you could still feel a little nub up here. You just rub.
That explains.
And I'm sorry. The Lenny Bruce joke was we're sorry, but his mother found out he didn't want to be a doctor, and there are rules, and that's not mine. That's stolen from Lenny Bruce, who used to say it's bad enough. My people did it. We found a note in the basement. I did it. Signed Morty. And he had a whole shtick, which today, that's
might not be able to get away with.
I mean, today, that's not like especially close to the line.
Oh, no.
But could you picture in 1950s, someone going on stage saying that and eventually getting arrested for that? I mean, it's horrifying. We think of ourselves as the land of the free, but not so much.
One thing I know I wanted to ask you in our conversation today is, do you think that Pfizer had developed their very effective vaccine, had the data on it before the election? Do you have any information to think that they were being political?
So two things about that. First, Pfizer is one of the few companies who did not participate in Operation Warp Speed. They signed a deal,
which is the Trump administration's initiative to develop a vaccine, right?
Where money was spread out all over the place. Now, they did sign a deal with the administration saying, if we develop a vaccine and it's proven safe and effective, you will buy 50 to 100 million doses with the option of buying 500 million. But that was just a deal, a contract. No money exchanged hands, supposedly. And second, and this is the more important thing, the company they partnered with, Biotigen, whatever it is in Germany, they did take $400 million, but it was from the German government. So if you want to thank a politician, thank Angela Merkel. Don't thank Donald Trump. He really had nothing to do with this. Although, to be fair, Operation Warp Speed is one of the few things the Trump administration did with the pandemic and did it well.
Yeah, but I mean, it's like it's a kind of a no-brainer. A lot of this stuff is no-brainer. Some of it's not politically popular, like shutting businesses down, wearing masks. But it's not it's not hard to get smart people in a room to come up with vaccine development, how we can best spread billions of dollars around, and it's not hard, I think, to come up with some of the other ideas if you listen to the scientists. So I'm having a hard time giving them credit. But do you think that Pfizer was being political by not announcing it before the election?
No, because this came from a specific group of people, and the woman who forwarded this to whoever had to release it didn't get it till Sunday, if what I read in Reuters and AP was correct. So
what about the other question that people are saying about Pfizer? I talked to Peter Hotez, who's a vaccine developer, and he said he did not like their press release, and they did that in the way that they did that, and they never like that. It's all about shareholder interest and value.
Well, when you're a public company, that's kind of what you do. That is their. Remember, a PR department is in service of the organization, and the organization is in service of the shareholder. So it's always going to have that spin. You can argue Milton Friedman made it much worse by saying, ignore all your other constituencies, ignore any other potential audience or people involved in your chain, like employees and patients, whenever it's only about shareholders. I think that philosophy is misguided, but there's really no getting away from the fact that publicly traded company that's invested billions of dollars into a particular sort of vaccine. But by the way, this vaccine may not be the magic bullet.
Right. But
you need 2 shots 3 weeks apart.
Yeah, there are problems with it. Yep.
It has to be transported at, what is it, 80 degrees below zero. So it's got some, and you could do that. You could create, liquid nitrogen canisters that are filled with vaccine. It just makes it more expensive. And as opposed to something you could transport in temperature, you could put 100,000 of them in a tractor trailer instead of 1,000.
Is it true that noise we hear in your background is the men constructing a sub-zero fridge so that you can have as many doses as you need for your friends? And how do I get access to one for myself?
Arbitraging Pfizer's. I'm buying them cheap and selling them dear on the secondary market.
All right. So in terms of what we're seeing with these COVID numbers, I know you're always tracking this. You love math. You love statistics. You love economics, obviously finance, health policy, of course. And Dr. Aaron Carroll and Nick Bagley wrote a piece in the New York Times, and I think a lot of people are looking at this, but I want your analysis of it, which is basically the public health experts, the virologists, the epidemiologists are saying we are in for it. The next couple of months is going to be brutal. A lot of people, hundreds of thousands of people maybe even, are going to die, but certainly tens and thousands. We can avoid that. We can save many of them if we could just hold out for a few more months. And then we can be vaccinated. We could save lots of people and spread them out so hospitals aren't crushed. But we have to shut a lot of things down, and that will hurt the economy, which is why the government should pay for it. Everybody makes it through. Is that a tough analysis?
I think that's fair. If I was going to be advising Joe Biden, I would say rip the Band-Aid off early. Take your pain now and deal with it later, because so you do a national mask mandate, you do a 10-day or a 2-week national lockdown. You basically say, here's how we're going to get through this. Unless you're police, fire, EMT, food service delivery, oil delivery, they'll really carve out a list. Stay the fuck home for 2 weeks. Let this virus die out naturally. And we're going to pay you for this to stay home in order to get on top of this. We're going to do what should have been done a year ago, 250,000 deaths ago. We're going to take a page from New Zealand. We're going to take a page from South Korea. We're going to do testing and contact tracing, and we're going to get on top of this, and we're going to follow what the scientists say. But by the way, kudos to the president-elect for appointing a coronavirus task force that's filled with scientists and doctors and vaccine experts and immunologists, and not a bunch of political hacks and people with no experience and son-in-laws and unqualified vice presidents.
One of the issues with it, Peter Hotez pointed out when I was talking to him a couple of days ago, is that the scientists that have been chosen are not necessarily going to be the ones that are going to be effective at communicating at very red state governors. And maybe we should appoint people that speak their language, because as you know, Ritholtz, there are two different languages being spoken now in America. How do we communicate the science to a red state governor so that he or she understands exactly what needs to be done?
I don't think that's going to be a problem, because by January 20th, if you look at a map of the U.S., the red states are on fire. Not like California was, but we just had 130,000 new daily. We've been over 100,000 a day for, 9 days? And we passed 10 million. By the time January 20th rolls around, the red states, even DeSantis in Florida, and I forgot the woman governor, one of the Dakotas, she's a high-functioning idiot.
Yeah.
Just like, listen, I believe in freedom. It's up to you. If you choose to wear a mask, that's great. And if you don't, well, that's up to you. And I always want to say,
Christine Noem.
Whenever you say mask, I'm going to substitute drunk driving, and you'll hear how fucking idiotic what you're saying is.
Why? How would you?
Reckless and irresponsible. And these people should not merely be voted out of office; they should be thrown out of the country for their just sheer recklessness. It's shocking.
Well, it's shocking, but you study behavior, and I mean,
you don't have to be an expert in behavior to know it's irresponsible to tell people what they want. Hey, you have teenage children. Treat your teenage children the way these governors are treating their electorate. What would happen? But it's so indulgent and just bad parenting.
How do you think about the economic behavior, the idea that some business owner is mad that they're not allowed to stay open, even though people aren't going to be coming in because people are going to be staying home, whether it's a hair salon, a gym, or a restaurant? I mean, let the government pay you to all stay home. I mean, why is it got to be so controversial?
This is why you need a national response. This is why the federal government. But this month's Vanity Fair, there's a horrible, horrible story about how Jared Kushner shit the bed on this. It's just
he shits the bed on everything.
Unqualified person,
of course,
in way over their head. And so what you had was a whole bunch of tech companies and big companies going to the White House and saying, "Hey, listen, Mary Barra of General Motors, we can manufacture PPE and ventilators and whatever you need. You just have to exercise the defense, whatever the name of that is, the Defense Authorization Act that basically forces us to say we're going to do this. You tell us how much you want. You tell us what you're going to pay, and we make it happen." And now, you still can't go to Amazon. You still can't buy Purell. You could buy some of the other companies that may or may not have their history of quality products. You can't buy the sanitizing wipe. You can't get Clorox. You can't get so much stuff is still unavailable. At least the masks you can now buy pretty readily, because anybody that's in the clothing industry can make a mask. 3M is the company that made the N95. By the way, good luck finding those.
By the way, the argument I just want to make is, and I just got that Vanity Fair article that you're talking about, which Bess Levin,
horrifying.
Jared Kushner is an even bigger idiot than previously thought, and yes, that's saying something by Bess Levin. The idea was the Trump administration, Jared Kushner's idea was to let states manage the pandemic, as opposed to having a national one-size-fits-all plan. What's wrong with that? Why,
What's wrong with that? Why do we want 50 states bidding up the price of everything, as opposed to having the federal government say, we're buying 200 million of these, we're going to pay you this, yes or no? Is it you, or am I going to the next guy on my list? You want to have the biggest sale you've ever had in your life, or do you want your competitors to get it? Instead, they created a situation that sent prices higher, that it just, if you were creating a way to fuck this up as bad as humanly possible, this is other than Operation Warp Speed, which was the $3 trillion CARES Act spread a lot of money around. There were some problems with some of the way it was done, and more money went to big companies. And
lobbyists got involved, as they always do. It's inevitable, it would seem, when you're handing out huge cash.
It happened so quickly that they didn't have a chance to get involved.
By the way, I don't want to just dismiss that. There are government watchdogs, nonprofits, and internal government watchdogs, oversight groups, whose job it is to follow up on the money. And Elizabeth Warren is doing this today with the IG of that money, and that IG was like, fuck off to Elizabeth Warren. You don't know what you're talking about, basically. You don't know. But Crew, which is a nonprofit organization which watches government ethics, which has always been great, they're screaming about all the lobbyists that got their hands on that money. So I just want to say that it's not inevitable. There are organizations that people can support, and there is a story that people should read and journalists are covering about how that money gets handed out. I mean, you wrote a whole book, Bailout Nation, which basically was an autopsy on how that money got handed out. So I think it's important to give credit to those who are trying to prevent that. But what can we do now? You tweeted this article from Bloomberg, this climate plan. What do you see that the Biden administration can do? You're one of these people who has been screaming about the demand for infrastructure investment since, I think, when we first met early in the Obama administration. A climate plan. It doesn't have to be called the Green New Deal. What should Biden do, and what can he do without a Senate majority, if that's the case?
So assuming they don't take, assuming the Republicans take at least one of the seats in Georgia on January 5th, which is they have an easier path to a majority, I would say that, Biden historically has been a centrist politician. He is not the sort of guy that is out on the far fringes of the party. And so I'm glad that you can hear it, because I can really hear it. So you're saying Biden is going to be able to find a way to make a deal with Mitch McConnell in the Senate to get money to build shit? Yeah, I think Mitch McConnell is pretty much just doing Biden's bidding now, and basically, McConnell is doing Trump's bidding now, but he knows it's a hollow gesture. I know, but if he's able to negotiate, it seems like if Mitch McConnell is able to, just based on the Obama years, to negotiate a good deal, even for conservative Republican states for infrastructure, he won't do it because that'll help the economy. And if that helps the economy, it helps, Joe Biden. I mean, that does seem like to be the case in the past. And I'm not sure why it would be different necessarily. They don't even mind if their own states suffer. They still get reelected. Because they got Hannity on their side. I think that the 08-09 response, the 09-2010 response of Mitch McConnell was very much had racist overtones. I think they were genuinely shocked. I agree, but what about the point I made? You think Biden he wants to get worked with McConnell for 30 years? You have to assume that if Biden can't get a deal done with McConnell, then basically he should blame everything on the Senate and spend the rest of his first term signing executive orders and trying to do what he can to flip the Senate. If there wasn't a political problem, what should government do to create demand, to build, to create jobs, to build infrastructure on especially what I would see, like this Green New Deal, Barry, is so damaged in the branding because this idea of environmentalism and so on. But if you explain sustainability and jobs created by sustainable building, etc., it's not very political. It's like guys who are really masculine with tools building shit. Wait till the saw's done. So, by the way, they've had this thing. I've been doing television hits and radio and a conference all day today. So I'm like, just wait till 3:00, and then you ping me, and I forgot to tell them, I got something at 3. It's only me. Don't worry. It's hilarious. So there's a bunch of obvious things you can do. A carbon tax would be one thing, would work pretty well. Basically, look at the infrastructure in the United States: roads, bridges, tunnels, airports, electrical grid, broadband, cellular, harbors, and ports. And you could basically spend $10 trillion over the next 10 years, looking at how far advanced the U.S. was ahead of the rest of the world in the 50s and 60s, and we've allowed everybody to pass us. So, if you want self-driving cars, you don't have to rely on their ability to see the car in front of them. You can embed RFID devices in specific places on roads, on intersections, on the side of the highway, on other vehicles. And so the computers within cars know exactly what their surroundings are like. You can make roads better. You can speed up traffic. You can make roads safer. You could take airports in the United States, which have been terrible relative to the rest of the world, and bring them into a modern place.
So plenty could be done, although the carbon tax idea, I mean, again, I asked for an answer without if politics weren't an obstacle, but, anything that's a tax is...
what about the gasoline taxes, 19 cents back to the, I think in 91 or 81, it's ridiculous. You bring that up to 30 cents and you roll that into the highway trust funds. There's so much stuff we can do. Hey, if it was up to me, I would bury every power line that's in a suburban neighborhood. It doesn't make sense to do it in the Midwest or in the far West where it's mostly open space. But every time we get a hurricane or a storm and you see power going out for, 100,000 people, create a.
We just did that. Just did that in my town. And there's like a causeway across the lake, and a big storm took down all the telephone poles. And I explained to my daughter, they should be underground. It just costs a lot of money. Next thing I know, I see them burying those telephone poles, and then I get the opportunity to explain to my daughters again where your taxpayer money goes to. And now we won't have to spend money on that another time to fix it again because they're underground. And yes, it's
one of the things I think the Democrats have taken for granted, have done a really bad job of, is explaining the value of, I'm doing my own infrastructure work here, of explaining the value of government and what the services government is supposed to provide. And they've allowed the crazy small government drown it in a bathtub approach to allow essential services to be neglected because it was a good political move to say, oh, I'm against. It wasn't that they were against bad government or big government. They were against any sort of government. And the Dems, much to their everlasting dismay, have allowed that philosophy to become dominant.
Well, I don't, by the way, who's written a lot about this and is really good? They have a new book, Jacob Hacker and Paul Pearson. But their book, American Amnesia, is amazing. Politics, Winner Take All Politics is the most important book I've read on politics ever. And their new book, Let Them Eat Tweets, How the Right Rules in an Age of Extreme Inequality. All good to deal with. Yeah, what do you have?
I love this book, which is a history of American capitalism. And as much as people have the image of the lone cowboy out, this is about the long history of the U.S. as sort of a joint venture with private sector that first of all, the U.S. had much more aggressive patent laws than Europe. So immediately the United States, the New World was advantaged over the UK and France and elsewhere. And then second, every time a new idea came along, like the telegraph or the railroad, or, either the government was there as a co-investor or as the first client. Like the first telegraph was strung from Washington, D.C., a couple of miles as a proof of concept. Basically, the government paid for the first telegraph. And the telegraph was a huge, huge innovation back in the day when a guy would literally have to get on a horse and ride 4 days to bring you a piece of mail.
But the problem, it feels like the damage done to government's reputation is so much worse now as a result of Trump. I mean, that was the goal. That was Bannon's goal, is to destroy the reputation. Now, whatever is left, like what had a good reputation left? CDC, NIH, the United States Post Office. I mean, and now
court.
Yeah, and our elections had a pretty good reputation, generally speaking. And now
our elections did fine. If you just ignore the crazies on Twitter, the elections were fine. You see Republicans and Democrats on a local level saying we've had no fraud. So far, there's one person who registered their mother to vote, and her mother was deceased, and it was a Trump supporter. Other than that, there have been, and to be fair, in Philadelphia, the poll watchers were 10 feet from where they were counting polls, and the judge said, no, you could go 6 feet because that's the CDC rules for social distancing. And there was closed circuit television in all these places. Yeah. And, I think as of this morning, the Trump administration is 0 for 12 in their legal challenges.
Is that right? Is that the latest?
Yeah. 0 for 12.
I know they were 0 for 9.
They will get a recount in the states where it's either automatic when it's less than 0.5%, or you can purchase a recount, meaning you have to pay for a poll watcher, the people to do it, if it's less than 1%. So there'll be a recount in Georgia. There might be a recount in Pennsylvania. I think Wisconsin and Michigan, there'll be a recount. But typically, a few hundred votes change during a recount, not tens of thousands. And so it's pretty clear this election is over to everybody but Fat Nixon. Everybody else has figured out that it's done.
Thank you very much for your time today. As always, Barry Ritholtz, I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Sorry about all the noise.
No worries. It was fine.
That's our infrastructure built.
All right, Barry Ritholtz at Ritholtz. Subscribe to his daily reads. Of course, thank you to him on Twitter. Send him a tweet at Ritholtz, and of course at Aaron D. Miller too. Hope to see you tonight at 8:30 in the Hangout, and also before that, you can go to YouTube. Check me out live with one of my favorite all-time comedians and the most thoughtful people I know, Ted Alexandra. I'm going to be his guest. Very excited about that, and so check that out. Hope to see you tonight at 8:30 in the Zoom Hangout. You got to be a subscriber. Sign up at patreon.com/Pete Dominick. Go to the paid subscription link in the show notes. Thank you very much for listening. Check me out on Discord, where there's a whole bunch of other folks hanging out, chatting at all times. You're never alone if you're a member of the stand-up community. Talk to you tomorrow.